Today with book reviews, our first book review is Liberty's First Crisis, written by Charles Slack. Before we get dive into it, I just want to say this is an amazing book. If you don't know anything about the creation of the United States or where our laws come, who wrote them, how we almost lost everything that we have now, this is a very interesting read. Um, yeah, so let's just dive right into it. I'm going to go through all the 5 questions about what, where, when, why, and then dive into the two biggest things I think when it comes to choosing to read about. So the content, what is it about? How much is it offering to you as a reader? Do you already know about it? Is there anything new that you're going to learn? And then how it was written. I think that plays a huge part in whether or not you enjoy a book. If you don't like how it's written, if it's written historically, but it's kind of written out of place, then maybe you're not going to enjoy it as much. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, what is it about? I kind of just briefly talked about it, but it's about the libel laws that happened right after the Constitution was written, and how in the early part of American history, there was obviously, just like now, as you see now, there's a big push for political power, and they tried silencing from other people. And at the time, just like you might see your favorite political representative on Twitter, it's a big deal if they get censored. Back then, most of the big political players at the time, they all had, if not owned, they all had a big financial backing behind newspapers at the time. So if it was Jefferson versus Adams, Jefferson's paper would write just a bunch of negative stuff towards Adams and vice versa. So to get around that, they would try and get censor the opposite newspaper once they were in power. So it kind of goes to that story and how, like the smallest fish were hurt by this. It's never the big people, right? You see it even now. It's never really the big people who get hurt by these decisions. I mean, even most recently, you look at Donald Trump being kicked off Twitter. Yeah, he might have lost some of political power, but his bottom line isn't hurt. But the people that work for him, or like an Alex Jones, like whoever it may be, the smaller people are usually affected most by these decisions. And you'll see it here. There's a small congressman from Vermont that gets hurt. There's people who just make random comments on the street that can get hurt by these laws that were created by Adams, and then so yeah, it's a very interesting story. If you don't know much about it, you're gonna most of the information in this book's gonna be new to you. If you are somewhat relevant in what happened during these times, other than just taking like a high school class, if you've studied on this stuff, um, then you're definitely gonna learn something from it. And I think it's a book that a lot of people should read, understanding how important freedom of speech is, how we almost lost it, where it comes from, and I think it's an important book for everyone to read. Um, so this book was published in 2015. Mostly just goes the starting point of the book is probably like the 1780s, right after the war, and then the starting of the Constitution, and then it's about the 1820s, and it kind of leads on even after that. Talks about the dichotomies that like Jefferson faced, where it's freedom of speech and all that stuff, while also states' rights versus how he owned slavery and how he would have fared going forward. Kind of ends with that, where most of this takes place in Northeast, a lot of Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, New York. That's where most of the action's at. Pennsylvania, Philadelphia becomes a key player. So, all right. So now to get like the rating and why you should read it and why you shouldn't read it, depending on who you are. So on the content, I give it a 9 out of 10. I think it adds in so much detail. I'm a big historian. I love to read history, especially early American history. But there's a lot in here that I didn't know, and I think it's interesting because you take a high school class on it, but you never really gets into small details. Even in college, they do talk about it to an extent. But in here, you can slow down as yourself, and that I want to focus on this one chapter and do my own research on this. So you can read a chapter, see what law was in place, and you can start doing your own research. Look into when that law was in place, if anything recent has been like that since then. Uh, really garner your own knowledge on the issue. From that standpoint, I think Charles did an amazing job on doing his own research, putting it together, finding all like the small, minute details, doing a good job also of not putting his own influence into it. I have my own interview with him on my Patreon. You can go check that out. But he even said that it's tough to not put your own personal influence because he's also big into the freedom of speech. He was originally a journalist, so it's does a good job of being in the middle but also being factual and having a supporting case for why he thinks that freedom of speech is a really important thing. How it was written, I think he does an amazing job writing this book. It flows really smoothly, very easy to read. Doesn't take I mean, it shouldn't take you that long to read this book at all. It definitely garners your attention as you go on. I wouldn't say that it's like fast paced, action packed, but it definitely does a good job of keeping you interested in reading. It's not really a book you want to put down. It can get dense after a while, where you kind of have to, where it's like, all right, this is just too much information, and I'm kind of getting tired. I will say the one thing I didn't necessarily like about it is at some points of the book, it does seem like it jumps around a little too much as far as like the time frame, just because of the players that are involved, and he kind of goes back and forth between the chapters of them. So I'll give that part like a 7 out of 10. I personally think anyone in the world should probably read this book. If you hate freedom of speech and you hate the United States, maybe you shouldn't. But other than that, I think it's a book that everyone has to read and understand how important freedom of speech is, and how close we almost got to losing it, and how important it is to use your voice. It doesn't matter what opinion you have on certain issues. Definitely voice your opinion, give reasons why you think the way that you do, and be okay with that and understand that everyone's allowed to have their own differencing opinion. So that's our first review.